Today's gospel message is from Mark 2, beginning at the 13th verse. Once again, Jesus went out beside the lake. A large crowd came to him, and he began to teach them. As he walked along, he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax collector's booth. "Follow me," Jesus told him, and Levi got up and followed him. While Jesus was having dinner at Levi's house, many tax collectors and sinners were eating with him and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. When the teachers of the law, who were Pharisees, saw him eating with the sinners and tax collectors, they asked his disciples, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" On hearing this, Jesus said to them, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." Here ends the gospel message for today.
Thank you, Mary. Well, this morning we're going to see why today's Bible passage that you just heard is extremely important for us in 2023. How it sets the template for what we hope to do this year. In this lesson from Mark 2 that we just heard, Jesus calls Levi, better known as Matthew, to be his disciple. And just like Jesus has done for each one of us. And it changes Levi's life. And this presents Levi with a situation that he wants to figure out. And that is, Levi knows people who don't know Jesus like he knows Jesus. And he wishes they did. Because he knows the blessing they would receive by knowing Jesus. But the question that he has to ponder is, how is that knowing Jesus going to happen? And we might be wondering the same thing in our lives and walks through this earth. In fact, a problem in many churches is that they have almost no significant contact with unbelievers. And they aren't quite sure how to change that. So what does Levi do here? If you take a look in verse 15, we read later, Levi invited Jesus and his disciples to his home as dinner guests, along with many tax collectors and other disreputable sinners. That's it. Levi hosts what is sometimes called a bridge event, an event to bring believers and unbelievers together. And so this morning we're going to look at this bridge event process so that we might know how we can do it and why. Well, first, and this may seem strange to some of us, but a good number of bridge events don't have a lot of sharing of one's faith. In fact, if you take a look at the Bible passage, I want to ask you, does the text say that Jesus taught the tax collectors and disreputable sinners that night? Yeah. Does it say that the good news was shared with them that particular night? Now, to be honest, maybe it was shared with them. Maybe this passage just doesn't say. But I'd like you to consider this. It doesn't say that any of the unbelievers went home believers that night. And I'm guessing that if that faith sharing happened and some became believers, that the gospel writer Mark would have mentioned that. In fact, two other gospel writers include this same incident in their gospel accounts. One of them being Levi, Matthew, the one who actually threw the party. and Luke as well. And none of them specifically mention that faith sharing occurred that particular night. And I think this is important for us to understand, because you see, the main goal of a bridge event is just to get Christians and non-Christians together. So they can mix and interact and get to know one another better. And maybe begin the process of becoming true friends. That's the main goal of a bridge event. And so if this is what we're considering doing as Spirit of Joy, then what makes a great bridge event? To me, at least three things. First, and this one's going to be very short, first, the Christians have to come. Christians have to see the importance of meeting and interacting with unbelievers. And you see, that night, a little more than 2,000 years ago, Jesus and his disciples were not only invited to that dinner, but they came. They saw it as being an important event. The second thing that makes a great bridge event is the event or activity has to be designed to be attractive to the unbeliever. And this is important because most mainline churches focus on inviting unbelievers to very churchy events. And that's because we see these things as attractive. And we feel that that is how to introduce people to Jesus. And so with the greatest of intentions, we invite them to something like a worship service or an in-depth Bible study. But often they don't come because it doesn't appeal to them enough to where they want to come. And to help us understand their reaction, I would liken their response to my response of approaching the Royal Gorge Bridge. And it's in Colorado. You've got a picture of it there on the cover of your bulletin. If you take a look, that's the Royal Gorge Bridge. And I want to tell you, the tourist book I read invited me to go cross that bridge. And I'll tell you, it sounded kind of appealing. But what you need to know about me to understand my reaction is that I'm somewhat afraid of heights. What I like to simply call an aversion to dying. And Royal Gorge Bridge is a log-high suspension bridge. And when I was thinking of going over it, there was a nice strong wind that day. And actually, I'm pretty tall-waisted, and the edge was about this high on me. So nice wind, and it's like the past Pastor Haiti. And so when the day came and I thought about crossing that bridge, I had serious second thoughts. I started to feel very uncomfortable. And I started to feel fear. And I'll tell you, even my wife's invitation for me to walk across that bridge fell on deaf ears. In fact, I started to wonder why she kept inviting me to come look over the edge. Try to remember, do we have life insurance? What's the motivation here? Well, I want to tell you, I did eventually cross that bridge. And it was one of the best experiences I've had. I mean, it was beautiful. And I think you get a little glimpse of that with that picture on the front cover, but I mean, it's absolutely amazing. But what I want us to understand this morning is that the only reason I did it is because as I stood at the beginning of that bridge, I was attracted by what I saw. The view ahead. That's why I went. Because it was attractive to me, I found the motivation to go beyond my fear, to go beyond my uncomfortableness, and to actually go experience it. Now, what does that have to do with building a relational bridge between believers and unbelievers? Well, I'm sure we can all imagine that those same emotions of fear and uncomfortableness are often present when people are invited to something new to them. Especially if it's in an unfamiliar setting to them. And that's clearly true of unbelievers. The fear of stepping into a room of strangers, of being in an unfamiliar place, of not knowing what to expect, or what to make of spiritual things, keeps them away. And so the most loving thing to do is to make the bridge event comfortable and attractive to them. You see, even with Jesus, for many people, they didn't come to hear his message. Not at first. Rather, they wanted to be healed. That's why they came. That was what was attractive to them. They wanted to be healed. And it was only after he had healed them that he had the opportunity to talk with them. And to be able to show them something that was even more important than healing. You see, in today's gospel lesson, if you take a look, that attractive quality came from the fact that both groups must have liked the host, Matthew. And both groups seemed to be attracted to good food. I mean, go figure. For them, that seems to have been enough. But you see, for others, it will take more than that. Or something different. But the point is, we have to plan bridge events with a focus on what is attractive not so much to us, but to the people we are inviting. And you see, 2,000 years ago, Matthew's dinner party achieved that. And you'll notice the unbelievers came. Well, the last element that makes a great bridge event is that at some point there has to be a good level of interaction between the two groups. And I know that must seem obvious, or kind of like, duh. But let me ask you this, and why this is important to think about. Have any of you ever been to a school dance? Come on, show. Either that or I'm going to believe none of you ever went to a dance. All right, so many of us have been to a school dance, okay? So think back to when you were younger. I thought about saying when you were young, but you guys are all young, so younger. You're welcome. So let me set the stage, at least where I grew up, okay? And for any of those of you keeping track, so Kenosha, Wisconsin. This is what happened in Kenosha, Wisconsin. I'm there. The music is playing. The dance floor is open. But the boys and girls keep hugging their respective walls. The boys on the one side, the girls on the other side. No interaction. In fact, it had to be where it happened at every dance. There were, I think, 4 young girls who finally got so fed up with no one crossing the void in dancing that they went out onto the dance floor and danced with each other. Because the guys apparently didn't have the courage to breach that void. But you see, if you've ever witnessed that situation of the two groups hugging the wall, then you know that even the best planned social events won't produce new friendships if there isn't some fun mixing of the two groups. And as I've said before, we naturally find comfort in being with the same group of people. People we know, people who are like us. But you see, we Christians have a much higher calling. We're called to interact with people who don't yet know the one who saved them. I mean, think of that. They don't know the one who saved them. And so for their sake, Jesus calls us out of our comfort zones to be the ones who make the first move, to welcome them and interact with them. Because that's when the fun begins. When you have the courage to breach that void and to actually interact with them. And so this process of building relational bridges between believers and unbelievers is a big part of what Jesus wants us to be about. You see, it's a beginning. And we're going to talk after the service about how we can build 4 of these beautiful bridges this spring and summer. Amen. See, this is a teaser sermon. It'll be continued. Please stand.